Hi, everyone. My name is Monica LaPlante, and I'm the program director here at the Lake George Association. Thank you all so much for tuning in to learn about your property and how land use can affect the health of our lake. You'll first be learning about basic environmental principles to set the foundation for us to then take you through a fictitious property to learn what you can do to help keep Lake George clean and healthy. I'll first hand it off to Bria Arvidsson to kick us off.
So imagine your favorite property on the lake. When you think of this property, you might think of the view, the peace of mind that you find, the loons, and probably also just the lake itself. I'd be surprised if anyone said, yes, I think of my septic system. Why would you? It's out of sight and it's out of mind. Your system contains all the things that you flush or clean away, which ends up creating essentially an underground source of nutrient-rich material full of untreated chemicals, cleaning agents that also have nitrogen and phosphorus and bacteria like E. coli. A properly working system will treat this wastewater to proper levels, but discharges the effluent into the ground, and all the groundwater eventually flows into the lake. And if your system isn't working properly, where do those nutrients all go? Nutrients from antiquated systems can leach into our lake and streams, depending on where you are in the watershed. The nutrients, like phosphorus, leaching through is especially noticeable because algae love nutrients and algae will grow where they are available. And there's a lot of treated wastewater or effluent to love. There are nearly 6,000 private septic systems within the watershed, and 45% of those properties, almost 3,000, are within 500 feet of the lake or 100 feet of streams, one of the most impactful areas the lake's water quality. On top of all of that, we estimate that 66%, which is almost 4,000 properties, of all the systems in the watershed are antiquated, not maintained, and not properly working for the property that they're built for. Now go back to your favorite property on the lake. Where does the rainwater go once it hits that property, and what does it take with it when it flows off that property into the lake or the stream? Anything that you can think of that's not natural to Lake George. It's heavy metals, traffic from 9N, oils from your lawnmower or your car, or maybe your beach erodes away every time that it rains, or a pesticide that you put on your veggie garden. Some things are more potent than others, like this fact from the EPA. Oil from just one oil change can pollute 1 million gallons of water. Like this photo, a single untreated storm drain flowing directly into the lake can promote algae growth on your dock or your boat, taste and odor issues for your drinking water, among other problems. Now take this property in your mind and imagine them across the whole watershed. We have this network of streams that flow into Lake George. You can picture them like veins if Lake George is the heart. Streams discharge 44 billion gallons of water into Lake George in just 1 year. So just for perspective, you might use 16 gallons for a long shower, and that's a lot of water. With nearly 10,000 developed properties, there's an estimate of 3 billion gallons of stormwater runoff, the single biggest threat to Lake George water quality. We have a little over 2,200 acres of impervious surfaces within the watershed that flow into the lake. You could fit 35,000 average size homes side by side, packed in with each other to cover that acreage. Also with 2,200 acres, we have nearly 400 miles of road, which would be equivalent of driving all the way from the Fort William Henry in Lake George all the way down to Baltimore, Maryland. When you consider the heavy metals alone that potentially flow off into the lake from these roads, it starts to make sense why we're so concerned about the stormwater runoff. Now I'm turning this over to Monica, who's going to talk to you about the Jefferson Project and their research on harmful algal blooms.
Thank you, Bria. The content for this portion of the webinar has been generously provided to us by the Jefferson Project and specifically written by Brian Mattis, who has been a researcher here on Lake George for over 9 years. So to kick us off here, we're first going to chat about a major partnership with IBM, RPI, and the LGA called the Jefferson Project that's doing incredible work on the lake. So the mission of the Jefferson Project is to create a high-resolution view of the lake's ecosystem and forecast its future to support informed decisions to protect our lake. The science drives us to be able to create informed solutions, and the more science, the better. This partnership believes that high-frequency data monitoring holds the key to understanding many lake phenomena, so we have installed over 500 sensors to monitor Lake George. That's above and below the water. We have weather stations, floating platforms, and even acoustic instruments. You can actually view all the data at our data dashboard at jeffersonproject.live, which I highly recommend. You can see current sensor measurements, weather forecasts for your location, as well as summaries on decades of lake health that we have. So next, let's talk about harmful algal blooms, or HABs for short. So what are HABs? HABs are high densities of cyanobacteria, also referred to as blue-green algae, which are naturally occurring organisms that can sometimes be harmful. These are not invasive species, and in fact, they're one of the oldest organisms on the planet, dating back 3.5 billion years. Cyanobacteria in the ocean are actually responsible for creating the air you're breathing right now. But although cyanobacteria are naturally occurring, when their numbers grow out of control, a dense concentration of cyanobacteria can look like green paint on the surface of the water, and we call that a HAB. HABs are potentially toxic, but we have not observed this in Lake George yet. That's been confirmed by outside laboratories, and since HABs have started to occur here, we've partnered with a chemist at RPI to continuously test our waters for these toxins during each HAB event. And I will note that we say potentially toxic here because not all types of cyanobacteria are capable of producing toxins. We're working with geneticists to get a better understanding of the cyanobacteria community at Lake George and to be able to track their dynamics over the years. So now let's get into the mechanism of why we think HABs are occurring at Lake George. 1, we know that nutrients are fertilizers for HABs. So like most photosynthetic organisms, they need more sunlight to grow. These nutrients are making their way into the lake, typically because of things like property development and amplified storm events due to climate change. So climate change has resulted in more and more intense storms, according to data from the area collected since the 1960s. This means more sediments and more nutrients are being washed into lakes more than ever after these intense storms. And more development means more of an impact on the lake, plain and simple. Stormwater runoff and septic issues are usually the main culprits here. The algae cells we're concerned about overwinter on the bottom of shallow bays. Once ice melts in the spring, these dormant cells begin to grow right away on the lake bed. And now remember before I mentioned climate change, if we continue to see winters like the one we just had with very minimal ice coverage, it's very possible that these cells can begin growing even earlier in the season. So the picture you see here is actually from Basin Bay, and these are cyanobacteria colonies growing from their dormant seed. As the summer goes on and we experience a few storms, these dormant cells are receiving a delivery of nutrients from nearby streams and wetlands. Streams are often colder, and when that cold water hits the lake, it's actually not a matter of simple mixing and dilution of that water. The colder water often immediately sinks right to the bottom of these shallow bays, flowing right over the developing algal colonies and feeding them the nutrients that they need to grow. As we get into the fall, available nutrients and high light in the shallow areas of the lake have given the cyanobacteria plenty of opportunity to grow. What's key here is that the colonies of algae are often growing below the surface still, just out of sight. And that's why we've developed sensor platforms specifically with that in mind. We built vertical profilers, which I hope you've all seen around the lake, in-house at RPI to monitor events like this. And even further, we've discovered that typical measurement frequency, which is a single data point per second, just actually isn't enough. We found that these sensors can actually completely miss these colonies in the water column unless you actually ramp up your measurement frequency quite a bit. And lastly, on calm, warm days, these colonies can quickly float to the surface in high numbers. Because they're actually able to control their buoyancy, it may seem like a bloom suddenly occurs, but in reality, it's actually been growing beneath the surface this entire time. Now, I do want to mention that this is a very simplified version of the process. The first slideshow Brian sent to us was actually 4 hours long, and I'm just saying this so you can recognize that this is a very complicated global issue that many, many scientists are working very hard to understand. I'm going to hand it over to Randy now to talk about your property and the actions you can take to help reduce this influx of nutrients into the lake that cause HABs.
Thank you for the introduction, Monica. We are going to present a case study that has a fictional landscape, but will address real-world stormwater and septic system issues. The case study is overly simplified and will answer the following questions. What's the difference in stormwater runoff from natural versus developed landscapes? What can you do on your own property to manage stormwater runoff and maintain your septic system? And what are the benefits of these practices? Our fictional landscape is going to take us back in time over 200 years ago. We have a natural landscape with no development. What will happen to rainfall as it falls on this property? The first thing you see in the slide is the mature vegetation, lots of trees. Mature trees intercept and take up rainwater, reducing the velocity and volume of stormwater runoff. Large, mature trees with a crown of about 35 to 40 feet can intercept 2,000 gallons of rainfall annually. Another benefit of the trees that we can't see in this image is the root structure of the trees and the benefits they provide to the soils. The roots keep the soils loose and not compacted, which increases the ability of the soil to store water. One thing that might not be clear in the image is that there's a slope to this property. That slope has a natural undulating topography and provides small pockets that can capture rainfall and slow down any runoff, which is another benefit to having a natural landscape. The final piece in this image that we'd like to point out is the stream. Take note of the stream banks and how they are not confined and are lined with vegetation. This allows for higher flows to access the floodplain and spread out. This reduces scour in the stream. In addition, the natural flow paths that bring water to the stream are covered by trees and the natural landscape, slowing down the flow during rain events. This cuts down on erosion. So here's our developed landscape. Remember, it's a fictional landscape and purposely poorly developed. How does this developed property influence water flowing into the lake? What do you think rain does now, especially when compared to the natural landscape in the previous slide? Once that rainfall turns into runoff, what does it carry with it? Let's take a look. Impervious surfaces. The road at the bottom of the image and the sloped driveway provide a smooth path for stormwater to follow. It carries pollutants downhill right towards the stream. The slope. Now you can see it, right? Slope increases velocity of anything flowing over it. It doesn't allow for much infiltration and can cause erosion. Trees. Where'd they go? And what did they take with them? No more interception of the rain, right? That equates to more runoff. Let's take a look at the soils. No trees, no more root structure to keep the soil loose. In fact, the soil is now compacted from the machinery that used to clear the trees and build the house. This decreases the ability of the soil to absorb rainfall. The stream. The stream is now confined by large boulders, cutting off access to the floodplain. Strong flows from storm events will scour the stream bed, lowering it, bringing sediments into the lake. Our water resource area is what we've combined from ponds and wetlands, and we've added only wetlands in this case study. The wetlands have been replaced by lawn and are continually mowed when they are dry enough. See the wet areas along the stream and the ruts caused by mowing when wet? They are no longer functioning wetlands and can't act as a filter and no longer remove nutrients before runoff enters the stream and the lake. The Critical Environmental Area, or CEA, is a 500-foot buffer around Lake George. It is critical because it has a greater influence on water quality than areas that are further away from the lake. This property is located in the CEA and has a greater influence on Lake George's water quality. Septic. This property has a septic system. It's just up the hill from the house, and it's leaking. Your septic system should be inspected and maintained regularly. So how do we make changes to address stormwater? Stormwater is the priority, so we tackle that first. In this slide, we started to add elements back into the landscape to help with stormwater runoff. We added rain gardens off the back patio, at the bottom of the parking area on the driveway, and added one near the top of the driveway to capture some runoff coming off the road. We want to capture stormwater close to the source and try to utilize any natural depressions. By using natural elements or depressions, we can better infiltrate and slow the runoff. The benefits of adding a rain garden or retention area: if you take a 1,250 square foot roof, that creates about 780 gallons of runoff in a 1-inch storm. A 10 foot by 10 foot rain garden can capture about 1,500 gallons of that runoff. The cost of that is about $2,000 to $5,000, depending on the size of the rain garden. For this slide, we have reduced impervious areas. We added concrete pavers in the parking area on the driveway and added some porous pavers along the driveway. While not ideal on slopes greater than 5%, this homeowner wanted to try porous pavers on the slope and tied that infiltration into the pavers at the bottom for greater capacity. When you look at your property, you can ask yourself if you need that much impervious surface. Can you use grass or stone pavers somewhere? Can you narrow the driveway? Maybe add stone pavers or porous pavers instead. They are good for areas where you park. Also, disconnect impervious surfaces. Don't put downspouts directly onto impervious surfaces. Have them flow onto the lawn or into bioretention areas. Some of the benefits of installing porous pavers: on a 1,000 square foot parking area, a 1-inch rainfall is going to generate about 623 gallons of runoff. By putting in porous pavers, runoff could be reduced by up to 80%. Pavers are going to cost anywhere between $4 and $30 per square foot, and that's depending on the type, whether it's a plastic or a concrete paver. On this slide, you can see some bigger changes. We've reduced our lawn and turf areas. The homeowner planted native trees and vegetation to maximize the natural landscape. A pollinator garden was added. They could have just let the area grow on its own by not mowing it, but they actually helped it along and created the pollinator garden. A filter strip, or small section of vegetation that filters stormwater as it travels across the lawn, could have been added as well. Some of the benefits of doing this: one large tree intercepts 40% of annual rainfall. That's about 16 inches in the Lake George area. Costs to plant a tree vary depending on maturity and the number of trees that you plant. You can complete a do-it-yourself project or have a tree professional install the trees. Create a shoreline or stream buffer. This is what we've done here. Both types of buffers were added to the drawing. A buffer acts as a filter for stormwater reaching the lake, provides multiple benefits including thermal protection, wildlife habitat, and is inexpensive to create and maintain. A good buffer uses a 4-tiered planting approach with trees, shrubs, perennials, and duff. Duff is the decomposing plant litter that falls each year and breaks down into the soils. When planting a buffer or any vegetation, you'll want to use native trees and plants that have already adapted to our environment and climate. They have a higher chance of surviving and thriving. Some of the benefits of a buffer is directly related to runoff. A 100-foot buffer will capture about 73% of runoff. A 50-foot buffer, about 58% of the runoff. A 35-foot buffer, about 48%. And grass only is only about 18% of the runoff. As you can see, the smaller the width, the less amount of runoff that's captured. Costs will vary depending on the number of trees, shrubs, plants, and size of the buffer. A 1,250 square foot buffer could be covered with about $1,500 to $2,000 of materials plus installation costs. Start the buffer, let it grow, and allow it to fill in over time. We didn't change anything on this slide, but we want to point out some things. Stop using fertilizers and pesticides. In most cases, they aren't necessary, and in some locations around the lake, they are prohibited. Raise the blade. Raise the blade of your lawnmower to 3 inches high. As pointed out earlier, you can also stop mowing certain areas to allow native plants to just grow. Leave your grass clippings on the lawn. As the grass breaks down, it will naturally fertilize your lawn. Some of the benefits of doing this: it's a cost-saving measure. Less time mowing, more time swimming, boating, and not spending money on fertilizer or pesticides. Those costs will add up. Also, taller grass creates a more drought-resistant lawn with deeper roots and less need for watering. In our last fictional case study slide, we have installed a stormwater treatment device. In this case, a trench drain to capture runoff coming off the main road, and we have directed it into a rain garden at the top of the driveway. Other devices, including infiltration trenches, water bars, or open-top culverts, sediment traps, and catch basins. This type of treatment device could provide a runoff reduction of about 90% for most storms. The costs depend on size and treatment device or structure. As a note, stone is relatively inexpensive. Labor and design for most devices might cost more, but might be needed depending on the stormwater solution. This is a before and after slide. There's a big difference from the poorly developed site to the current site that is now better equipped to handle stormwater. Over time, the homeowner may decide to grow things out, filling in more space with native vegetation and providing a greater impact on water quality. We should note that the homeowner did fix his septic issue after a site inspection under the new septic inspection regulations implemented by the Lake George Park Commission. The system was over 60 years old and had multiple points of failure. It also hadn't been pumped out in over 10 years. Needless to say, it has been replaced with a modern system and is now functioning well. Remember, when each homeowner reviews their own property, solution names will be similar, but will be unique to each property. If you decide you want less lawn, just stop mowing. The native vegetation will grow. If you want to speed up the process, give it a hand and plant something. The solutions presented on these slides today will reduce stormwater runoff and nutrients entering Lake George. Septic systems. I just spoke about the Lake George Park Commission septic inspection program in the previous slide. The Park Commission started the inspection program this year, and they are planning to inspect about 500 properties each year. The program only inspects septic systems that are within 500 feet of the shoreline, also known as the critical environmental area, and those that are within 100 feet of the regulated DEC stream. For those of you with a septic system, I would like to point you to a great resource for your septic systems. SafeSepticSystems.org, the complete safe septic guide. The website has everything you need to know about your septic systems, from how your septic works to maintenance, protection, and even financing. Speaking of financing, 2 local banks, Adirondack Trust and Glens Falls National, are offering 0 and low interest loans to replace your septic system. New York State had a septic system replacement fund for Lake George that would fund 50% of the cost of replacing your system up to $10,000. This was available in 2022 and 2023, and we hope this funding will continue in the coming years. Know your system. Where is it located? Where is your tank? Where is your leach field? What about setbacks? Are you 100 feet from the lake, stream, or your well and drinking water source? What kind of a system is it? Can you find the access area for cleanouts? How old is your system? Most systems have a life expectancy of 30 to 40 years. Protect your system. How can you protect your system? You can conserve water, repair leaks, running faucets and toilets, so you're not overloading your system. Don't put unwanted materials into the system. Avoid killers, household chemicals, and cloggers, grease or wipes. Don't add additives, they're not needed. Prevent large roots from establishing on your leach field. No trees, shallow-rooted vegetation only, please. Also, keep heavy equipment off the absorption field. Maintain your septic system by pumping out solids every 3 to 5 years. You'll want to pump the tank when it's full, about a third full. If you have hosted some large parties or the system has been used more than in the past, use a sludge judge, pictured here, to measure sludge. Maintain your septic like you maintain your car or your furnace, and make sure you use a certified hauler for your waste. Keep records of everything: permits, as-built, and pump-outs. Inspect your system. Visual inspections can be done year-round by the homeowner. Look for bright green grass, maybe wet areas around the system when it hasn't rained in days, or possible odors. There can also be signs of sewage backup in drains and toilets and slow-draining sinks. Ask for an inspection from your certified hauler during your regular pump-out every 3 to 5 years. Have them check the conditions of the tanks, components, and pipes. Any needed repairs should be completed by an experienced contractor and engineer, and replace any failing systems. Innovative technologies. Innovative technologies are good for nutrient-sensitive areas with site constraints, such as those sites with setback issues or poorly draining soils. Enhanced treatment units, or ETUs, pictured in the top image on the slide, can be considered treatment in a box. Claris, Fuji, and Multiflow are examples of these types of systems. ETUs require electrical service, and there is also a yearly service contract to ensure everything is working properly. Another innovative technology addresses the leach field and adopting absorption field technology. An example is the bottom image on the slide. These are classified as geotextile sand filter systems, lightweight infiltration chambers, or geofilter pressure systems. Examples include Elgin, which uses plastics to treat effluent, and Puriflow, which uses peat. Please remember, all systems should be properly sized and maintained, and requires to be designed by a professional engineer.
Thank you so much, Randy, and thank you all for tuning in and taking the time to learn about your property and how land use affects the water quality of Lake George. Please feel free to reach out to the LGA with any questions, and we encourage you to head over to our website and sign up to be a lake protector. You'll receive a detailed profile of your property with all of the land attributes that Randy just walked us through, so you'll know exactly what your property looks like and exactly what you can do to help the lake. And remember, we protect Lake George together.